But I am excited to be here.
Okay, you came up here, you didn't tell me your name, so I don't know your
My name is Mike Shinoda. I play in a band called Linkin Park. She didn't know that. This is a great reaction. Official Mike Shinoda on Twitch.
Linkin Park would emerge out of the early 2000s as one of the biggest rock acts on the planet. This would be thanks to the 1-2 punch of 2000's Hybrid Theory and 2003's Meteora. The band would return in 2004 with a rock-rap crossover EP called Collision Course that saw the band team up with rapper Jay-Z. Linkin Park had been working non-stop for nearly a decade, dating back to their pre-Linkin Park band Zero. The band opted to take some time off by the middle of the decade, with founder and vocalist Mike Shinoda starting a new project called Fort Minor. However, it wasn't an immediate success, and initially it almost looked like it was a total failure. Today, let's talk about the history of the group Fort Minor. Following the Collision Course EP coming out in late 2004, Mike Shinoda would start the hip-hop side project Fort Minor with the members of the hip-hop group Styles of Beyond that featured Ryu, or Ryan Patrick Megan, and Takbir Bashir, or Tak as he's sometimes known by. Shinoda knew the guys already for 8 years, and he actually designed their logo and did the graphic design for their first album. Shinoda had begun working on the Fort Minor material actually dating back to 2003. And Shinoda's bandmates in Linkin Park were pretty supportive of the project and even appeared in the video for Remember the Name, and a few of them lent some help to the creation of Fort Minor's debut album. Of course, the biggest question Shinoda got at the time was, why start a new group? Well, he would tell the Boston Globe in an interview, "First, let me say I'm more than proud of what Linkin Park has done and stands for. It's true that I wanted to make a grittier hip-hop oriented record and try to develop a sound that just wouldn't be viable within what we do in Linkin Park. This is a much more individualized and personalized record." Shinoda also took issue with how hip-hop at the time was heavily synthesized and manufactured, and wanted to do something a bit different even if it wasn't technically commercial. He would refer to the sound of Fort Minor as, and I quote, "not straight hip-hop, but not rock at all." Shinoda has long been an avid fan of rap and hip-hop, growing up on it, telling Louder Sound, "I got Run DMC's Raising Hell when it first came out, and my favorite track that I'd play over and over was It's Tricky. That made me want to rap for sure." Shinoda would also be influenced by Beastie Boys, Public Enemy, NWA, in addition to Cypress Hill. As for the name Fort Minor, he would tell an interviewer, "Fort represents the more aggressive side of music. Minor can mean a few things. If you're talking about music theory, the minor key is darker. I wanted to name the album rather than having my name on the cover because I want people to focus on the music, not me." For Shinoda, his early days starting out rapping was done with some pretty cheap equipment, and it was over the last several years, having a tremendous amount of success with Linkin Park, that he learned a lot about how to work in the studio, and now he had access to better and more expensive equipment, so he wanted to see what he could do if he went back to his roots. For Shinoda, it was important that all the instruments were played by hand and not put into a computer and chopped up, because according to him, that would give the record more groove and feel. Jay-Z would serve as an executive producer on the album and would also contribute a spoken word part to the record as well. It was during the writing of Fort Minor's debut album, Jay-Z and his Linkin Park bandmate guitarist Brad Delson advised Shinoda on which songs to keep and which songs to throw away. Shinoda would write all the lyrics and play all the instruments himself, with the exception of one sample and one harp part, according to one interview he gave. It was in August of 2005, several months before Fort Minor was set to release their debut album, a song was leaked from the record. That song would be titled Remember the Name, and you can still read the responses on the Linkin Park fan forums from 2005. The songs that Shinoda would write for Fort Minor would involve topics he didn't really feel comfortable doing with Linkin Park, and tracks that were far more deeply personal. The song Kenji, for example, which is Shinoda's middle name, would be perhaps one of the most personal tracks on the record, that documents his father and aunt's treatment in the Japanese internment camps during World War II, even featuring interviews with his father. Shinoda would tell the Great Fall Tribune, "On the Linkin Park stuff, the songs tend to be universally more personal. There are 5 guys in the band that have to stand behind the song and say these lyrics represent me. This project, I didn't have to answer to anybody." The Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles was so moved by the song Kenji that they actually had a dinner to honor Shinoda. Mike would also take the time to criticize the state of hip-hop with the track Cigarettes, which he criticized the genre for being too self-indulgent and all about the hustle. He would also draw parallels between the hip-hop genre at the time and the cigarette industry. Fort Minor's debut record, The Rising Tide, would be released in November of 2005. He would put out a sampler CD 1 month ahead called We Major, which was used to help promote the LP. The mixtape would feature cuts that didn't make it onto the Rising Tide album, and it was done with DJ Lantern. Fort Minor's debut record would be released on both Warner Brothers and Shinoda's Machine Shop Recordings. Shinoda would tell Anti-Music about the album's title. The Rising Tide is a play on words. The album is about a group of people who are tied together musically. They are rising up in the world of music together. The album would feature a star-studded lineup, and they were really just all friends of Shinoda, including Common, John Legend, The Roots' Black Thought, and Linkin Park's own DJ Han. Shinoda would even write the guest vocalist parts too on the record. The tour to support the album was a pretty big show in production, despite the fact that Mike was playing smaller venues than Linkin Park was typically used to. The production was so big that Shinoda lost money on each show, but he didn't really care because to him it was the only way to do the album justice in a live setting. Unlike a lot of hip-hop, which uses a DJ and pre-recorded tapes, he would be interviewed by a New York paper and revealed that would be so typical, and this project is so unique. There will be 11 plus people on stage, myself, Styles of Beyond, a drummer, a 3-piece string section, and 3 backing vocalists with me. It was by February of 2006, 3 months after the release of The Rising Tide. The record was a slow seller, and the first single, Remember the Name, seemed to go nowhere. The record hadn't even sold 100,000 copies yet, with Shinoda talking to the Boston Globe at the time, revealing, "We've done very well outside the States. Maybe it's more of an underground hip-hop record, but I'm confident people will find it and the sales will slowly build." And he would prove to be right. The album would see several singles being released, with Where'd You Go with Holly Brooks appearing on the track. She would be signed to Shinoda's label at the time. Shinoda wrote the song from the perspective of a person whose lover is always traveling. The song would end up being a worldwide hit, going top 40 in numerous countries, and it would peak at number 4 in America. It would be released in April of 2006, and the song was credited with helping boost sales of Fort Minor's debut album. In a strange twist of fate, though, it wouldn't be Where'd You Go that would be the biggest hit off the album, but rather the song Remember the Name, which would get a second life. It would be included in the soundtrack for the EA Sports video game NBA Live 2006. Then in 2006 and 2007, the NBA would adopt Remember the Name as the theme song for the playoffs. Soon enough, sports arenas added the song and became a popular workout song as well. Shinoda would talk to Kerrang about the song's slow build, saying it became really popular in sports, adding that it was the Chicago Bulls' walkout anthem for nearly a decade. That was a little bit strategic on my part. It started with action sports. I wanted it in skateboarding videos, then we realized that basketball worked really well too, and I'm a huge basketball fan. So I thought, let's do as much as we can do with the NBA and X Games. Those are cultural things though, it's not jingles. It's stuff that kind of becomes part of the fabric of a thing that you do in life. Remember the Name would end up charting, peaking at number 68 on the Hot 100 charts, and it proved to have lasting power, garnering nearly 700 million streams on Spotify. For reference, Linkin Park songs One Step Closer, Faint, and Crawling have been streamed about 600 million times each. The album would eventually recover and go platinum, selling about 1 million copies. It was in 2006 at the MTV Video Music Awards, Fort Minor would win the award for Best Ringtone for Where'd You Go. Honestly, does anybody use songs for ringtones these days? I feel like I don't really hear it anymore. Following 2006, Linkin Park would reassemble in the studio and return with another huge record with 2007's Minutes to Midnight, while Fort Minor would go on hiatus. It was in 2011 Shinoda would be interviewed and was asked about whether he had any future plans for Fort Minor. Now, I want to point out that Linkin Park's last 2 releases at this time were drastically different from their first 2 records. Shinoda would reveal to Billboard, "When I did the first Fort Minor album, the band was coming off Hybrid Theory and Meteora, which was really a time when we were known for one sound. Then we did Collision Course with Jay-Z, and I kind of missed the hip-hop songs I used to make when I was a teenager. So I made Fort Minor at the time, thinking it would never fit in with Linkin Park. Then lo and behold, a couple years later, we broadened out our stylistic approach in the studio, and my Fort Minor ideas could be incorporated into Linkin Park. In the years since, Linkin Park has paid homage to a few Fort Minor tunes during live performances, and in 2015, Shinoda would release a new Fort Minor track called Welcome. Since the death of Chester Bennington in 2017, Shinoda has released records mostly under his own name, and the future of Fort Minor still seems like it's up in the air. So let me know your thoughts on Fort Minor in the comments section below, guys. How did you like their first album, and do you still listen to their music? As always, if you have suggestions for future topics, use the link in the description box below, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll Your Stories. Take care.